Oh, there we go. Good. Can people hear me now? Sorry about that. So, yeah. So that perspective, and by the way, I'm also streaming this to anyone joining us on Spaces. Sorry, you guys didn't hear the sound. Can you guys hear sound now? Okay, now it's good. So we're having a discussion with Kanthan on a Shiva for president, what foreign policy looks like. Okay. So my perspective is one, fundamentally, Kanthan is not as an imperialist, not as a bourgeois, not as one member of the swarm. It's actually someone who grew up bottoms up as an engineer, as an innovator, as a scientist in a very, very different world. I grew up in a caste system in India, grew up in working class towns in the United States. I came here to the United States when the Vietnam War was going on, right? As a 7-year-old kid, you turn on the black and white TV and what you would see is, devastation going on in Vietnam and working people, poor blacks and poor whites, essentially going and fighting a war for US imperialism. And so the question is, what is national self-interest? I would argue that the perspective I have is that when they talk about self-interest, they're talking about a finite set of people, the 0.0000001%. All of them who fundamentally are Zionists and serve Israel in the United States. So they're not talking about the interests of the broad mass of the American working people, whose interests in many ways are connected with the working people of the world. And this is a very, very fundamentally different perspective, Kanthan, that I have. Having grown up bottoms up, Booby Kennedy never worked a day in his life. Neither has Trump. These people are fake heroes. Biden has some working class backgrounds, right? But fundamentally, his trajectory has been an agent of the swarm. So I have a unique perspective because I actually have worked for a living. As an innovator, I created the first email system. As an engineer, everything I do is governed by the laws of the universe. Every business I've started, it doesn't succeed if you actually don't produce anything and you serve people. You have to mobilize people. You have to bring people together. And as an activist for 43 years, my perspective is this concept of national self-interest. When the elites speak about it, they're actually talking, it's very connected to imperialism and manifest destiny, which means the concept of the quote unquote American empire, which you referred to in one of your questions you put forward. And that concept of the American empire has nothing to do with the mass of the 8 billion of people on this planet. So my perspective at a very high level is different. The value system here is also different. The value is when you take the concept of national self-interest that is governed to serve a very small set of people, it affects everything. It affects science. You produce science which is not really based on science for advancing truth. You create massive censorship infrastructures that has happened now. As many of you know, in 2020, I was the one who uncovered the fact that the government and social media companies are united. And now we have censorship 2.0 with people like Elon Musk being projected as some agent of free speech when it's very far from the truth. And then when it comes to health, in the United States right now, per Kaiser Permanente, over the last 60 years, the US life expectancy has been going downward in an upside down umbrella, which means if you have a child today in the United States, your child will have a shorter lifespan than you. So when the elites talk about national self-interest and their foreign policy has been dictated to rape and pillage the rest of the world for a very finite set of people. Now, it is baked in US propaganda to make the average working class person in the United States think that they're fighting for them, but it has nothing to do with them. And I think I'm the only one, Kanthan, who articulates this message, and it hits because people look at my life and they say, wow, look at this guy's journey. Came from nothing, built everything he has. And you look at the Kennedys, Kennedys, John Kennedy was the master of imperialism. He was, PR, public relations. A lot of public relations was spent on that family, who's one of the biggest warmongering families to make them look to the rest of the world. There were some kind-hearted people, the concept of Camelot. But it is John Kennedy who brought Henry Kissinger into the White House. No one should forget that. And it is the Kennedy administration, which gave the trajectory to every the entire process of U.S. imperialism we have today. But all of it was cloaked in this in this virtue signaling, as though the U.S. was going to go free other countries in the name of democracy. So I have at a very high level, Kantan, my position is that the working people of the United States and the working people of the world have nothing to do with the quote unquote national self-interest of the elites. That's fundamentally a very different perspective.
Yeah. So that's very refreshing to hear. And that's the truth, the war benefits are very, very few. And a lot of people have spoken up against that. There was a famous military general in the US, and he wrote a book called The War is a Racket.
Yeah.
And
he was a...
So, okay.
Well, what's also interesting is, growing up for me, Kantan, the perspective is, when I came to MIT in 1981, that's when the Contra war is going on, right? The U.S. that was sort of the, maybe the tail end, but still the U.S. subjugation of all of Latin America, right? From Pinochet to Nicaragua, Guatemala, etc. Prior to that, I had grown up watching Vietnam War, right? And then you had Afghanistan and Iraq. When I graduated with my PhD, among the 20,000 people, I was the only one who took up a massive sign and said U.S. out of Iraq as I was getting my PhD. Half of the crowd booed me and the other half, gave me innovation. So I have always been on the ground on this issue against U.S. imperialism. Every other candidate is an imperialist and a Zionist, Kantan. And their views do not represent the broad mass of American people. I'll give you one time I was organized a massive protest against when the United States was doing all this nonsense in Central America. And one of the guys that showed up to the rally was a Vietnam vet, a black Vietnam vet. And he said when he was fighting in Vietnam, one time he was in the jungles and he showed up to this part of the jungle where there's this big statue of a black soldier in chains. Ho Chi Minh had put it up. And it said, "Black man, what are you doing fighting for a country where you don't even have basic civil rights?" Mm-hmm. So these, and you can ask that about white people too in the United States, whites, blacks, the vast majority of working people now in the United States, in the last, since 1970, $47 trillion of wealth was transferred from bottom to the top. And the elites say that they're against socialism when they have benefited greatly from socialism for themselves. So this is a fundamental reality. The level of propaganda, particularly now with the consolidation of social media and a very deep level of censorship, when we should talk about that, which is part of this whole foreign policy process, is affecting the vast majority of people in the United States, because today you have these fake grifters acting like they're against or grifters who act like they're against the establishment content. That's the new wave, but they're lockstep and barrel with U.S. imperialist policies.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's take some specific examples. Suppose if you were the president, what would be your solution for the Ukraine war? And do you see Russia as like an enemy or somebody that the U.S. should work with? And what is your view on NATO and the expansion and the aggressive policies of NATO?
Yeah, so going back to my perspective as against imperialism, that when this Ukraine NATO stuff really started, I mean, you really go back, it was really around 2008, 2014, right, when the U.S. engineered the maiden quote unquote revolution in Ukraine. But the bottom line is, I think the United States should not be involved in NATO at all. NATO has become its own self-perpetuating entity, which serves NATO, and again, the same group of elites. I mean, the U.S. is NATO. U.S. is NATO. NATO is U.S. and Britain, to put it a little more accurately. Again, if you take the perspective where I go back into this thing about the national self-interest, the self-interest of the working people and the self-interest of the bourgeois, the American people, working people, they benefit nothing from being involved in NATO. So first of all, the U.S. should exit out of NATO. The second piece is this. Obviously, some people know that there was a verbal, quote unquote, a verbal promise made when the fall of the Soviet Union took place, that the U.S. would not move 1 inch east of Germany. Putin says that, Gorbachev was, I don't think he has a lot of respect for him, was dumb in the sense he never put this in writing. But the reality was that the U.S., NATO, has moved significantly onto the doorsteps of the quote unquote Russia, which resulted in Russia having to protect its sovereignty in a sense, and that was what precipitated the events in Ukraine. And to your earlier point, one cannot forget the history of the Soviet people, the Soviet Union and Russia fighting Nazism. You have neo-Nazis in Ukraine. And when you unwind this more and you look at history, one of the most important things that everyone in the world should understand is it was the people of Russia and the people of the Soviet Union who actually fought Nazism and fought back Hitler. When Victory Day took place, I did a tweet, Kant, and I said, it is important that we recognize who are the real heroes of fighting fascism and Nazism. It was the Russian people. And it was fascinating to watch, Kant, and on my feed, Nazis showed up, pro-Hitler people attacking me. Okay? And this is a very interesting dynamic that has occurred since October 7th. The Zionists who have always cooperated with the Nazis, Zionism and Nazism goes hand in glove. We see that the Zionists love anti-Semitism because then they can use the quote unquote anti-Semitism to beef up their Zionism. You have real anti-Semites being unleashed on the internet right now to support Zionism. So you saw this very interesting feed. You literally had Hitlerites come on my feed. So why is this precipitated? And I think you go down to this root of this issue, which is important for everyone to understand. In the early 1900s, everyone knew in the intellectual community, in the revolutionary circles, that there was going to be a major workers' revolution in the world. And the prediction was it would occur in Germany because of the advanced nature of the German working class. And the elites, British and US imperialism, funded Hitler. This has to be really understood. There were close to
absolutely.
There were close to 2.5 million Germans in very active trade unions in Germany. And so this effort globally, and also in the United States, these workers' movements were growing in the late 1800s. 4 American workers in the United States were hanged for fighting for the 8-hour workday. 7 American workers were shot in Milwaukee, Wisconsin for fighting for the 8-hour workday. None of these things the American working people are aware of. Then May Day, International Workers' Day, came directly by the international community honoring those 4 workers who were hanged in this travesty of justice in the United States. Now, Reagan changed it to Law Day, but no one in the United States today appreciates the musculature of the American working class, which is the one that defined what took place in the 1900s and 1940s, which was the advancement of the American working class. Now, in Europe, people were under the belief, and globally, that a massive workers' revolution movement would take place in Germany. And if that had indeed occurred, it would have changed the world drastically, in my view, a very positive way. But what happened was imperialism supported Hitler. And many of those bottoms-up workers' movements in Germany were led by Jews, working class Jews. The banker Jews are in cahoots with Hitler. And this is not, and the Zionists, who are in collusion with the Nazis, broadly use the term Jewish. They do not want to bring this class distinction. but there were, and who did Hitler wipe out first? He went into those beer halls or trade union halls and he wiped out those Jewish leaders. He didn't really touch any of the Jewish bankers, okay? And this is never discussed. The Zionists at that time in Germany were a fringe group. By the end of this process, they were bolstered by Nazism, and you have the results that you have today. But the context I'm giving here is that everyone needs to understand that the self-interest of the working people is very different than the self-interest of the swarm, as I call it. So everything in my view that is done from that point on, from the early 1900s to today, is to ensure people of the world have an amnesia and forget the power of working people uniting. That is what this is all about. So everything is done in the name of, quote unquote, you could call it swarms national self-interest, to divide working people of the world. And that's what this is about. And particularly the American working class, the goal is to shatter them into a million pieces, because it is the American working class which has things like the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Bill of Rights. And in order to, devastate the American working class has been a very, very relentless process of propaganda against them, to divide them into, quote unquote, left and right, to push forward this concept of manifest destiny, the American empire. That's what this has all been about. Because if the American working class were to rise up, you would have liberation for the vast majority of people throughout the planet. And that is what this is all about. The national self-interest that they talk about is to make sure that the working people in the United States do not unite with the working people throughout the world. So specifically when it comes to Russia, given that background I just gave, the people of Russia, the working people of Russia, have a huge solidarity with the working people of the United States. You can look at history. And particularly if you go back to the 1900s and look at that history. So there's been this process to deny that solidarity by actually supporting Nazis. And that is what Ukraine actually represents. The US elites are supporting Nazis in Ukraine to create a jingoism. So the American working people think the Russian people are their enemies, when it's far from the truth. So US should be out of NATO, period, for the American people's sake. We should have high cooperation and friendship beyond just a space station with the Russian people. And that's where it should begin, because if we want to talk about innovation, I know you guys call yourself Sputnik, right? It's quite extraordinary what occurred in 50 years from Tsardom, right? Less than 50 years, 33 years, right? From 1917 to what the Russian people achieved to put a satellite up. That was done by a very powerful revolution that took place in Russia. And no one can deny that. So the trajectory is that if we truly want the interests of the working people, which is innovation, technology, science that support the broad set of people, there's no other better cooperation than the people of Russia and the people of America. But what we have today is,
absolutely.
It's right there. It's right in your face. And if you look at the American, but what we have done is, and as an innovator, what appalls me, having, I was, for a brief period, I was recruited, you probably know, by the Indian government to run one of the largest innovation centers there, and I exposed the corruption there. Having gotten a bunch of degrees from MIT, being an innovator, what I see now is, if you look at your life today, if you really look at it in the United States, and you look at how your life was in the 50s, I think for the average working person, it's actually gone down, Kunthan. Like, what benefits of this grand innovation of AI, this, that, does the average American person really benefit in terms of their life? Do they have more freedom? Do they have better health? Do they have more truth? And I would say it's negative. The innovation that's been done by the elites in the name of, quote unquote, national self-interest has been massive control, massive surveillance, with a sugarcoating of people like Elon Musk acting like everything's great. So that's what we live in, a very, very dangerous time, because we're rapidly heading towards fascism. That's where we actually are. And the tip of that spear of fascism is a resurgence of neo-Nazism blending with Zionism. That's where we are right now. And I see it so clearly. So
yeah, and they're just, they don't have any plans, they don't have any vision, and they just are on non-stop, one war after another, one enemy after another, and there's
well, Kantan, there's a reason for this, right? And some of the politicians are picking up this analysis I gave, is that the US dollar is not backed by anything except an aircraft carrier, right?
yeah.
So the leading US economic theorists are promoting MMT, modern monetary theory. The fundamentals of modern monetary theory are print as much money as you want, as long as you're the reserve currency, right? Because you're charging 3-4% interest for the rest of the world, right? You're basically a credit card in some sense, right? So, however, this is based, how do you maintain yourself as a reserve currency? What's not being done because you have a strong economy per se, right? Or some fundamentals of great innovation, it's being done through aircraft carriers and F-16s and missiles. So the United States elites, in the name of quote unquote national self-interest, have gotten themselves into a very unstable bind because they need war to maintain their reserve currency status. And this is what they've done. The economic interest of the US elites to be the reserve currency is directly bonded to becoming maintaining themselves as a quote unquote American empire with massive amounts of military might. They're inextricably linked now. At least, 100 years ago, there was some gold and maybe even the petrodollar, but those have all been detached. So it's directly linked to war, period. So without war, without subjugation of other people, the US dollar loses its value. And the elites of these other countries are also bootlickers of US imperialism and Zionism. In India, for example, people may know you have this hyperinflated stock market, and the elites are actually selling their shares, right? Or doing share buybacks. And where are they putting their money? In US dollars, something. So you have this perpetual motion machine of the elites of the world are very closely tied to the dollar still. We can talk about BRICS, but there's still this incessant addiction to the dollar, the way it's all structured among that strata.
Yeah, because a lot of these politicians and the elites in the developing nations, what they do is, like you said, they make up the money, whether it's legal or kickbacks or whatever, and then they place that money in Western banks, in Swiss banks, in Panama, Caribbean, the London Islands, whatever. So those people, it's in their interest for the dollar to be strong and the US to be the hegemon, because that protects their wealth. And then they have children, who go to Harvard, to Oxford, whatever. So, and they have bought real estate in Miami and Manhattan and London. So these people also have vested interest in maintaining the empire.
Right. That's what I'm saying. So what we're seeing is a global interconnected consolidation of what I call the swarm, the bourgeois, the elites as never before. So that's fundamentally what's happened. In concomitant to that, if you study from a systems perspective, everyone knows, I'm a big believer, not a believer, but from a very grounded perspective, the knowledge of system science, which really emerged in the 50s, gives us a way to really grapple and give us a framework to solve these problems. But from that perspective, the global elites are united, to support imperialism. And that's where we're actually at. And this needs to be understood very, very clearly. Now, this is very, very different than the interests of the working people of the world. So I think we're at a very interesting opportunity, is that if in America, the working people are mobilized bottoms up, which is what we're doing with our movement for Truth, Freedom, Health, and my run for president. It's a very different campaign. We're the only ones on the ground. We're the only ones who actually go play the game fairly. Content. All of these other guys take money from Zionists. And then if you even look at the election campaign process, content, just as an aside, we have to get on the ballot in every state. Well, how do you do that? Well, you have to, in the normal honest model, you're supposed to have actual supporters in every state who go out and get signatures for you to get on the ballots, okay, in different states. Well, these people don't even do that. What they do is they take Zionist money, and they take money from one hand and they go give it to consultants who actually go do the signature vendor collection, which should be illegal. So none of these people actually are doing any campaign. And as a note, people should understand the United States, there are campaign finance limits. People can donate 2,000 to 3,000 as an individual, or 10 as a couple. I forget the numbers, okay? But when it comes to getting on the ballot, it's infinite money, infinite. So any person can decide, oh, they want XYZ person on the ballot. They can fund them infinitely, and they do not, and that's off the books. So I'll give you a case in point. In Utah, we had to get on the ballot. We actually went in the rain and snow, myself and others. You won't find any presidential candidate on the ground collecting signatures in a shopping mall. We did that. We got on the ballot, all the signatures. Booby Kennedy couldn't even get 1,000 signatures, Kunthin. He had to go do a backroom deal with the Secretary of State to extend it, which they did not tell us. We filed all of our paperwork on time. They still have not put us on the ballot, but him. The level of corruption that takes place against working people who are coming bottoms up and for their leaders, that is what all of our volunteers experience. And it's a good experience, Kunthin, because people are realizing the level of third, quote unquote, I don't even want to say third, well, the level of corruption in the United States. When people try to build bottoms up movements, because the US elites have the fear of what took place in 1917 in Russia. They have the fear of the workers' movements that took place. Everything that they do is guided to make sure the working people of the United States do not rise up, bottoms up, and have their own leaders like me. So they drive them to fake leaders, act as though they're for the people, be it Trump, be it Booby, be it Biden, Tulsi Gabbard, all warmongering Zionist hoodlums. So my campaign offers people for the first time the opportunity to raise their consciousness and stop thinking about quote unquote winning. Because if you look at the data for the last 60 years, lifespan is going down, wages are going down, obesity is going up, cost of goods is going up, and your state of mental health is going way down. And this is not because of some vaccine. This has been a set of policies of these same elites who go and subjugate other people in other countries repeatedly. And it's these policies which have affected people's biologies, people's bank accounts, etc. And the only force that can take it out of there is leadership from below, guys like me. So what happens to me, Kunthin? I mean, since I was put back on Twitter, you can see the level of massive shadow banning, massive. And this is brought to you by Elon effing Musk, who is not a man of the people. Where Elon Musk begins and where government ends, nobody knows. This guy is a created character. Tesla, I mean, come on, the valuation of that was directly related to carbon credits. Directly. It would be worth nothing. Twitter, directly related to Section 230 immunity. And SpaceX, $7 billion from the government. So the elites are promoting people that they project as of the people who are actually hand in glove with them. And then, and they actively, Kunthin, suppress people who are truly of the people, guys like me, and promote people like Trump. You have to understand that the myth of the underdog, the myth of someone coming from below, is a very, very deep, mystical journey embedded into every human psyche of true people coming from below. Every great religion has it. Every great spiritual culture has it, right? And they have hijacked that very powerful psyche to project fake leaders, fake underdogs. Trump is not an underdog. Come on. He made $250 million from that quote unquote conviction. All engineered. It's all theater. Tucker Carlson, whatever you want to call him, CIA agent. He never tells the truth when it matters. So you've created a very powerful WWE set of characters in the United States right now, none of who represent the people. Every single one of them, Kanthan, is a Zionist. Every single one of them. That's the litmus test. And none of them care for the bottoms-up working people of this country, or for that matter, the world. So we live in a very, very awful time, in my view, but a very, very opportunistic time, because guys like me exist who did not get co-opted by them. And that's what our campaign represents. It is a vision for having a world where it's a world of the working people by the working people. Not a world for the elites, by the elites, because it's going to be perpetual warmongering, perpetual neo-Nazism, perpetual Zionism, perpetual quote-unquote innovations in technology, which have nothing to do with advancing humanity. But technologies, I mean, look at the technologies we create. They're quite extraordinary, right? You can take a submarine, take it way down under the ocean, then you can fire a hypersonic missile. Incredible amount of human effort have gone into that. What can human beings actually do? We have no idea, Kanthan, because of these foreign policies, because of these perpetual wars, because the 0.00001% manipulate through these technologies the 8 billion of us. So 2020, this is we're at a very important time, because you look back and you have to ask yourself, are you actually healthier? Look, I run many companies. It is very hard to hire young people who actually have their heads screwed on right in the United States. Very difficult. So when you get on the ground, and I've been on the ground here, India, at the highest levels, I can tell you that the level of human denigration at a very soul level is quite, and it's rapidly increasing. Now, our movement for truth, freedom, and health, and our campaign attracts amazing people, very self-reflective people who are saying, wow, fuck, I got screwed by Trump. Wow, I thought Booby Kennedy was this. Oh my God, he's the same. Because we are revealing to people, using a systems approach, what is the underlying root cause issues and how do we advance society. And the people that come to our movement, the people that will vote for me, are people of a very high degree of consciousness who want to shatter the swarm. And so whatever happens by the end of 2024, our campaign, our movement, which is, by the way, global, will be a force to be reckoned with, because we will have, brought back together what took place in the 1900s. Real people who want to fundamentally move society forward, not just, do what's convenient for today.
Yeah, so I was just reading this article from The Economist this morning, and they usually say bad things about China all the time. But in this, column, they totally admitted that China has surpassed the US in many aspects of science and technology. So China is now number one in patents, number one in the top 1% of the scientific papers. And China is number one in the Nature, the index, which is the compilation of the publications in the most prestigious journals. So this whole article goes through several statistics on how China has surpassed the US. And then I'm also reading about this article where the US Congress, they passed a law to ban the drones made in China, because being anti-China is the best way to get votes. But the reality on the ground is that 92% of all the drones used by the U.S. police, the U.S. Firefighters, the U.S. First responders, those drones are made in China. And these, the DJI drones are far better than the American drones, and they cost less. So this is just one example, some examples of how China has fallen behind. And rather than making the U.S. education better, the U.S. manufacturing better, the only solution the politicians and the swarm people have is to start a war with China and to constantly demonize China.
Yeah, I mean, look, Kantan, when we say China, even within China, right? I mean, I have a lot of friends. I went to school with MIT, American citizens. A couple of them actually, are professors now at Tsinghua, right? U.S. citizens still, Chinese guys. So I get a lot of very interesting news about China, sometimes contradictory, sometimes, but I start getting a decent idea. I don't think people appreciate that there are many, many different ways that China gets its organizational structure. They have one group of people, I forget what they're called. These are people who are some of the most wisest people who form an organization of noble service to China, and they actually can directly advise the premiers. You may know who they are. And this is a small set of people, and they'll take a policy issue, and they're thinking, 1,000-year perspective or 100-year perspective. Very thoughtful, policy perspectives. I don't think the American public has an understanding of that. The other thing is, when you contrast that to U.S. academia, we don't have those centers anymore. They used to exist. U.S. academia now has become the oldest profession in the world. And this really happened in the 70s after something called the Mansfield Amendment. Again, since we're talking about foreign policy, prior to the Vietnam War, you always had a massive military budget, but a portion of that military budget was allocated for pure basic research. And you just funded really good guys, meritocracy. Some guy who was doing some wild new stuff in number theory or topology or sitting in a basement of Bell Labs. He didn't have to worry about going and being a salesperson to get money. He could just do extraordinary research. Now, after Vietnam War, the Mansfield Amendment said that no basic research could go from the military, even though it was for pure basic research, and it had to go under the executive branch. So research in the US got highly, highly politicized. So after 1970, if you look at Kantan, you had really, really good scientists and engineers who could not play the game in academia, right? And they were not allowed in academia anymore. What ended up in academia, and I saw this at places like MIT, are not the best, but the people who are the politicians. I think Kissinger said, if you want to learn how to be a politician, go into academia, okay? So the academic environment in the United States is not driven, unfortunately, by doing great research. And to your point, I think the Putnam exam, or you go look at the top 10 math papers, it used to be US, Germany, and China. China dominates that right now because it requires significant amount of the public, secondary school infrastructure, high school infrastructure, right? To really create great mathematicians. Mathematics and engineering are one of those fields that you can't bullshit your way through. It's like going into a weight room. Either you can lift the weight or not. When it comes to engineering and math, either you can do the work or you can't. And those individuals who can do the math and engineering are significant assets to a country in every aspect. They're the ones who come up with new things. They're the ones who make major breakthroughs. And so if you really look down at innovation per se, which is one of my areas, we haven't had that great innovations. Nothing really, for that matter, right? I mean, major breakthroughs have been very nominal at best. So, but I think fundamentally, the interest of intellectual power to advance humanity is completely, I would say, disappeared in the United States. You can see it in the climate change discussions, right? You put in the US, you put anything climate change and you'll get funded for money. It's a $2 billion, $3 billion research industry. Even though most people who know in the world of physics that the entire climate stuff is a scam. But every academic will promote the scam now. So that's what's happened. You know, the interconnection between academia and foreign policy is quite tight. I don't think you're going to succeed in academia if you speak out against Ukraine, for example, right? Or you speak out against Israel. What's really unfortunate, Kanthan, I know you wanted to get to this, but Kanthan, are you there? Did we lose you?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the important things is that you know, in 2016, it was Trump who created the resolution by executive order to equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. And then it was Mike Johnson, this rabid Christian Zionist, in December of last year, who proposed a resolution after Israel went and, you know, started annihilating Palestine. And then more recently, the U.S. Congress, in a vote of 330 to 71, said moving forward that the United States should use the definition proposed by the Israeli Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which basically says that if you say anything against the state of Israel, that's anti-Semitic. So they've equated anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. So, and this has been embedded. If that law passes, that means the Department of Education of the United States, which means academic circles, will be restricted from saying anything against Israel. That's what the law will say. If you say stuff against Israel, you are anti-Semitic.
Yeah, I mean, it's just pure madness, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, then why don't they apply the same thing to Russia, China? So
right.
Nobody can say anything bad about Russia, China, Iran, Syria.
Well, what the IH, whatever the that definition says, they have 7 examples. One goes and reads it, which I did. One of the examples is if you say that Israel does anything worse than any other country, that will be anti-Semitic. Okay, so if you say Israel has worse human rights than Sweden, that's anti-Semitic, which may be a true statement. Yeah. So this is what's happening step by step by step. The Zionist Nazi or neo-Nazi alliance is accelerating by the swarm. That's what you see. That's what Ukraine represents. That's what that bill represents. So it's happening in a very deliberate manner, Kanthan, step by step by step. So we have now massive support for neo-Nazis in Ukraine. You have bills that are being passed, which are equating any censoring of Zionism, equating it to anti-Semitism. And you have the neo-Nazis and the Zionists coming together. So we're headed literally back to the 1900s, early 1900s.
Just madness. So what do you think about BRICS and the emergence of a multipolar world? Be stopped.
Well, so the reality is, I think if you go look, the architecture BRICS came out of JP Morgan, right? If you go look at the early documents on it. Now, the concept of a multipolar world, right? I mean, this has gone through various iterations, right? In many years ago, there was a concept of the non-aligned nations. You remember that, right?
Yeah.
And there was a movement.
beliefs.
Yeah, right. So there's been these different movements of the quote unquote third world, um, Russia aligned against, East versus West, right? The thing that I still keep coming back to is those may be some interesting developments which give opposition to British and US imperialism, but they also can be in some ways be antagonistic to the larger development of working people's interests globally, you say? Because you do have, the Indian elites, right? The Saudi Arabian elites, the South African elites. Do their interests align with their local people? I'll give you an example right now, right? And it's related to, if you go look back recently, and it's still going on now, at the anti-Israel protests, right? Throughout the Arab world, in places like even, UAE and all these places. One of the things that's not covered well is to understand that these Arab leaders themselves, these elites themselves, it's not like they support their people, right? If you look at Erdogan in Turkey, Erdogan goes whichever way the money is. Or you look at UAE, or you look at Saudi Arabia, or for that matter, even Iran, right? Now, they pose as an opposition to US and British imperialism, but within their own countries, they have serious instabilities. And so, by way of example, there were, in some of the mass protests that were taking place in Turkey or UAE, etc., the leaders of these Arab and Persian countries are quite concerned. What they're concerned about is, will these movements, which are anti-Zionist, also become exposing the elites in their countries? So there have been mass arrests of some of these leaders, these anti-Zionist leaders. And this has been an interesting balance that the leaders in these countries have had to deal with. So on the one hand, they are trying to be a force against US and British imperialism, but they have the contradictions of the reality within their own countries, you see? And I don't have enough visibility into, I have some visibility into some of these countries, but not enough of them. So we have to contend with that, right? So on the one hand, BRICS creates a multipolar world. It brings in competition to US and British imperialism. But what is it doing within those countries, right? So you take India, for example, right? When Israel invaded Palestine, the so-called Indian elites were all for Zionism. You saw that, right?
Yeah.
And we can have a discussion about that, because in many ways, the quote unquote Brahmanism, as I call it, or the casteism, is in many ways aligned with Zionism and Nazism. It's the concept of a few will control the many, right? That a few have that right, this philosophical political ideology, which has nothing to do with Judaism, very little to do with Hinduism per se. So political ideologies of Christianity get hijacked. The sprinkling of religious ideas mixed with ultimately embedded into a political ideology can be very, very powerful.
True.
So I think with BRICS, if you talk to most financial people in the United States, if they're managing someone's portfolio, all of them are moving about a third of their portfolio into BRICS nations, emerging markets. So people will take people's money, and I talked to a bunch of, pretty smart financial planners. They typically have, 2/3 still in the US, right? In the typical structure, bonds and equities. But the other third, they're putting into, emerging markets. So look, I think money is like water, it flows. And those in power, I don't think it's not like they're nationalistically BRICS or not. If there's money to be made, they're going to move capital there.
Yeah. And if you look at the growth, for example, just the BRICS nations right now, it accounts for 44% of the global growth in the economy. And now there are like maybe 15 to 20 more nations want to join BRICS. And they have a new paradigm that is without sanctions, without one country being the boss of everyone, and there's no one supreme currency. They want to create a basket of currencies. It's more democratic. So it has a lot of potential. And the people in the US, they're just living in a denial how the world is changing. They keep thinking that the US is going to be number one forever.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It comes back to the level of propaganda that's taking place in the United States. And I think the phenomenon is, I think the question on the table is, which I'm not frankly decided on, is, well, I am in this sense. If you look at the reserve currency status of the United States, that's where this all comes down to, right? If you, how does the United States maintain its reserve currency status? Do the BRICS nations, which are one group of the elites, and the other group strike a deal, Kanthan? You say? Do they strike some type of deal that allows the U.S. to be reserve currency, and they also get to have their cake and eat it too? You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's what I'm wondering, because ultimately, I think from a swarm mentality, it would be nice to think that there are, good people in other countries, leaders that have the interests of all working people, but I think that may be a pie in the sky idea. So unfortunately, I think that they may come to, like dividing the world up in some way, right? Coming to a quote unquote a peaceful coexistence for themselves. And that's what is outstanding. Like for Ukraine, I've heard some people say that, there'll be a lot of talk, but at the end of the day, Ukraine will be split. The spoils of war would be some of the NATO countries on the eastern part of Ukraine. Basically, there won't be any Ukraine left. We'll get some of those resources, and Russia will take the eastern part in Crimea, right, which they already have. So the issue is ultimately, history shows the elites work for them unless they're driven in a revolutionary way to work for the interests of the large masses of people. So that's what's unclear for me right now. You say, in terms of, are some of these people a Putin, or are they principled? You see what I'm saying? Are they driven by principles?
Yeah.
Right? Are they driven by wanting to be another organized crime family? You see? Like in the movie The Godfather, right? So they split up the neighborhood. Are these guys just going to split up the neighborhood, or are they driven by some, noble principles? And that's what I've been trying to figure out.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Point. If they're driven by noble principles, that's a very, very different calculus, So
for example, I certainly don't see that like in India. The elites, the top 1% or the top 5%, they really don't care much about the bottom 70%. They just want the masses to be just enough to be happy to get the votes. And I don't see any significant change in the lives of the bottom people. We still have like 1/3 of the children in India are malnourished, and something like 1/2 of the nation is dependent on free food from the government.
Mhm.
So they're doing some things, but I don't see the revolutionary or the noble spirit that you mentioned.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. These are some of the interesting questions, that I think about. And that's why I ultimately, the question is, this is why I'm a big believer in education, Kanthan. You know, if you look at your life, my life, anyone's lives, where my family came from here was ultimately education, which moved people. Because education is an asset that doesn't depreciate in some sense, right? It may not be as useful at some point because there's new education, but education is quite extraordinary because, in particularly, the right type of education, where people start to learn to think, and they start to learn to think, particularly politically, not in being silos. That's why, when I share with everything that we do in our movement for truth, freedom, health, my vision is you cannot just be just someone who's a doctor, right? You can't just be someone who's just a scientist. You can't be just someone who's a politician or an activist. You have to be able to think, fight, and heal in the modern world. You have to be a Renaissance person, at least from a leadership perspective. You have to understand science and innovation. You have to have a deep understanding of health, and you have to have a deep understanding of politics. There are a lot of people who say, well, I'm just a scientist. I'm not going to get involved. I'm an engineer. I just do my engineering. I don't want to know anything about politics, right? There's other people who say, well, I'm a politician. I don't need to know science. I don't need to know about that. I offset that to somebody else. And then other people are just saying, well, I'm in just the health world, right? I'm a doctor. I'm a healer, whatever, right? I do yoga, right? My view is you have to be all these three things. It's
absolutely
right. So think, fight, and heal. Truth, freedom, health. And that's the vision that I have. And that's sort of the foundation that those three words, Kanthan, come from, guess what? They come from general systems theory. They come from ancient Indian systems of medicine. So the path that I'm on comes from this very deep notion of integrating Eastern system principles with Western engineering principles. And that's what I uncovered, in 2010, that if you look at the concept of motion of information, matter, and energy, in the Indian system, that was called vata in the ancient systems of medicine. In engineering system science, that's called transport. Why call it freedom? A society cannot advance without the flow of information, matter, and energy, freedom. Now, if you have that, you can start doing another process we call in general systems theory conversion. You can take things and you can do transformation processes, like you can take all sorts of crazy ideas. You can have the scientific method and you understand what's real. You can take all sorts of crazy ideas, entrepreneurial ideas, and you put it through the process of innovation. You get great, new things. And in the Eastern system, that was known as a pitta process, believe it or not. A second force of the universe. And the third systemic force that exists is a structural process, the thing that contains all of this. You can't do anything. A society cannot prosper, cannot pursue freedom or truth without economic health, without physical health, right? Mental health. That's the infrastructure health. In the system of engineering science, that was called the structural part. In the Indian system, that was called kapha. So that's what I uncovered in my scientific research. This very deep understanding that is a Rosetta Stone between ancient systems of yoga and medicine with engineering systems theory. It's the exact same system. It's not some, religious, wear some saffron robes and put some vibhuti on your head, okay? So that's what I uncovered. And these principles are natural principles, Kanthan, that exist independent of us. They're inalienable principles, truth, freedom, health. So in my view, policies need to be governed by, do they advance truth? Do they advance freedom? Do they advance health? And what we now have in the United States, there are policies that advanced not truth, not innovation, censorship, and destruction of health. It's driven by power, profit, control.
Mm.
So my run for president, not only the philosophical, but the engineering basis from which I approach the world is grounded in the principles of how the world operates, not how we want to manipulate it for our self-interest. You say?
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. I mean, because I talk to so many seemingly smart people, but they live in silos, like you said.
Yeah.
So I talked to one doctor, and he knows nothing about food, and he knows nothing about politics, and that's all they get is slogans and sound bites from the mainstream media. And
Well,
then you have, yeah.
Well, Kantan, if you look at the history of medicine, there's two systems of medicine. One system of medicine which evolved to really understand the body for long-term health and well-being. Another system of medicine evolved, which was to put a soldier back on the field. That's where Western medicine originates from. I talk about this, I have a whole educational institute we created called the Systems Health Institute, where we're re-educating doctors, physicians, alternative medical people to understand the systems approach. But when you unravel the history of Western medicine, it comes from Florence Nightingale, who wasn't just a nurse. She was a member of the Royal Society of Statistics. She was quite an extraordinary woman. But during the Crimean War, she was the one who understood that soldiers were dying, not on the battlefield, but by going to the hospital. In the 1800s, you went to the hospital to die. It was filthy. There was feces on the floor. It was a horrible place. Doctors didn't go into hospitals. Okay? Nurses did. And what she did was she created the modern system of Western medicine, which was to put a soldier back on the field, which was good for that sake. After you got injured, after you didn't take care of your health for 50 years, and after you get some cancer, right? Chemotherapy, antibiotics, surgery, etc. So Western medicine was about putting someone back in the field. You say? It was not about understanding health from a systems perspective. That's what the yogis did. That's what the rishis did. That's what traditional systems of Chinese medicine understood. Now, what I was able to do is understand that those systems of medicine match the principles. There's 9 principles, by the way, which can come in control science. I got a bunch of books here. If you take a control science class, they match 1-to-1 with these systems of medicine. And so we now have an opportunity to integrate East and West in a very profound way. So this is what I see as a vision. There's incredible opportunities at a very deeply systemic level to integrate these two very different cultures in a positive way, understand where they're good, where they're not, and advance all humankind. And that's the vision that I have. And that's what this cannot happen with war. It has to happen through cooperation, but it has to happen from a systems level understanding. And so that's where the education piece kicks in. And that knowledge base is what I've uncovered. I used to teach this at MIT for years. And what I've done is I've taken this global now because one of my mentors, a guy called Jay Forrester, who's a system scientist, he used to be the advisor to the chairman of IBM, but he wanted to bring system science to the kindergarten level. So that's what I've done. What I used to teach at MIT to the elites, I've made accessible to everyone, with Truth, Freedom, Health. And our movement is educating people that politically, you have to take a systems approach, or you will be in the left or right camp. You'll be in the pro or anti camp on any issue. And that's how they divide people. For example, when the pandemic took place, some people were pro-vaccine, some people were anti-vaccine, right? I was the first one who did a bunch of videos in 2019. I said, this is beyond vax and anti-vax. It's about the immune system. You see, no one else has that perspective. You see, 40 years ago, Kantan, in the scientific world of the biological sciences, they would have huge conferences just on cancer, and they would meet separately in a silo. You had the aging conferences, and then the immunology conferences. Now we know that the immune system is the operating system of all disease. So the issue is, when you look globally, the elites are passing policies that is actually destroying the immune system of the global population. How are they doing that? Well, when a child is growing up, the child does not have a chance to play in the dirt, interact with other kids, where your immune system gets primed. So therefore, the kid has to get artificial immunization, which you can call a vaccine, right, or a drug. You also have the problem of the immense amount of stress, biological, mental, and physical stress adults and young people endure. This affects cortisol. This affects hormone levels. This affects the immune system. So if you want to create a healthy culture, I have an understanding of this, which goes down to understand the immune system. You destroy the immune system, you might as well call it game, set, match for humanity.
Yeah.
So
you know, I mean, then they also give children a whole bunch of the antibiotics, and the statistics are shocking. I forgot the exact numbers, but if you look at the number of the antibiotics, the average Western child, especially in the U.S., the child gets before the age of 5. It's like so shocking. And the antibiotics, what they do is they also would kill your the microbiome,
yep.
the gut bacteria, and that would totally destroys the immune system, because the gut bacteria play a major role in teaching the immune system about various stuff.
So Kanthan, you may know, right? In March of 2020, I was the only scientist, the only professional who came out who exposed the pandemic for what it was. You can go find that tweet. I think it was March 23rd. I said, this quote unquote pandemic will destroy economies, will destroy speech, and destroy health. And if you look at that point, and you look at the quote unquote leaders of the time, medical leaders, supposed politicians, supposed people fighting for medical freedom, all of them supported massive lockdowns. Number one, go look at it. I was the only one who said you don't need to lock down the economy. I came up with a protocol, vitamin D3, quercetin, zinc, which Zelenko, by the way, stole and bottled it. But those protocols, I mean, some of those videos got about 100, 200 million views. And at that time, you'll find that there were many of these so-called medical doctors who waited about a year and a half to speak out, but they were silent, Kanthan. So they made money through their silence. A guy called, they promote him a lot, this other brown guy, Asim Malhotra, comes out of nowhere. He was fine giving vaccines. Never spoke, supposedly a cardiologist. The inserts on the vaccine labels tell you that there is a chance of cardiovascular thrombosis, CVT, okay? He acts like he didn't read that. And then after all the reality takes place, then these doctors come out and essentially trying to protect the medical establishment. So they try to get the cake and eat it too. But I was the only one who called out the pandemic for what it was and gave a solution. I wrote to Trump. Marla Maples, his ex-wife, who loved my work, she delivered the letter. I said, don't shut down the economy. Take those people with pre-existing conditions, fine. You can quarantine them, but you can do very, very judicious ways. It's called personalized medicine, personalized and precision medicine. That's the kind of leaders we need, man. What did the person, if you are a leader, you say that you do the right thing at the right time. And you look at my history, I've always done the right thing at the right time. I was the one to expose the fact that the government of all these countries got together and they built backdoor portals into Twitter. Tucker Carlson, all these fools waited 3 years and they concealed my lawsuit, which exposed all this. They didn't speak about it because why, Kanthan? Because I'm independent. They do not want to give limelight. They do not want to give credit when you are not in one of their camps. And this is why I am convinced that the future is offline. The future is meeting with people directly. The future is mobilizing people bottoms up for any significant change. These online systems are highly, highly controlled now.
True.
Massively controlled. So no significant major science, major, advancement in health is going to come without a broad sense of freedom to do this. And what we thought social media was going to be in the internet to really advance freedom is actually is heading in the other way. You had censorship 1.0 under people like Jack Dorsey and Vijay Gadde. Now we're heading to censorship 2.0, where they will give you the illusion of speech, but the data mining, the predictive analytics, etc., will be used to shadow ban people, but more even insidiously. For example, content people could take all your followers, for example, right? Analyze them. And let's say there's someone who's not as sincere as you and direct all your traffic to them. You see? So that's what we see happening. Followers of mine who follow me will suddenly get pop-ups of Booby Kennedy, who's the charlatan, right? So the level of censorship, and this is why you need people who understand engineering and science to articulate this to people, because it's moving at a very rapid pace. We're rapidly moving into a very, very sugar-coated form of fascism, very rapidly.
Yeah, and then we have these, the chat GPT, which is just like the establishment propaganda.
Yeah.
Pretending to be artificially intelligent.
Look, I used to do research in AI for 20 years. Okay. I built one of the first companies. You can go see it. It was on the front page of Technology Review, the most prestigious technology newspaper in the world. I created the technology to automatically, separate from inventing email as a kid, my second life was inventing a technology that could automatically read and route email, okay, and respond. I did it. I won a contest for the White House originally, etc. But the methodologies, the techniques, they're not that. I mean, we did some good work. We had 3 major U.S. patents on this, but the chat GPT stuff, I look at it and it's sort of laughable. It's not that advanced. It is basically a semantic network with some quote unquote learning models, but this stuff has been around since the 1960s. Okay. So what it's doing is instantiating existing knowledge into it. So people were watching this stuff, who invented email, for example? Well, I invented email. The facts are black and white. But if you go read, the fake news sources like Wikipedia, they'll try to divert it to the military industrial complex, which did not invent email. They created a very rudimentary version of text messaging. So the analysis and what's really going to happen is people think these chat GPT things are the truth, when in fact they're going to be this instantiation of propaganda, as you said.
Yeah, because it's just the garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
And if you don't feed the AI the information from Dr.SHIVA, from blogs, from non-mainstream media, from non-mainstream resources, Russian media, Chinese media. If you don't have all those, then you just live in a bubble and you just consume the propaganda and then spit out the propaganda.
Yeah.
So that's not really AI.
Yeah. So in system science, what we teach, at Truth, Freedom, Health is there's 2 kinds of systems. And you learn this, hopefully at a good engineering class. There are what are called open systems and there are closed systems. An open system has 5 elements: an input, output, transport, conversion, storage. It takes information and it spits it out. An intelligent system has a particular goal. It is deciding, it is using its common sense to look at where it wants to go, and it's making decisions to achieve that particular goal. You see? So most of these AI systems themselves are open systems, dumb systems, and they're going to make people even dumber. That's where this is going.
Yeah, seriously.
So,
okay. Awesome. So we've been on for about an hour and a half.
Yep.
Do you want to take some questions from the audience?
Sure. I have let me tell you, I can do that. One of the things, Kanthan, I file my own lawsuits, right? So I have a lawsuit filing that I have to submit in about an hour and a half, which I have to get on. So I can take questions if it's okay with you for on maximum 15 minutes. Is that all right? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know. It's okay. It's totally understandable. All right. So who wants to go first? Suli, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Appreciate it. Dr. Shiva, it's a privilege to be in a space with you. A big follower of yours. I listen to all the. I'm subscribed to your YouTube channel. I wanted to ask you, as a medical as a medical expert, what is your take on Joe Biden? In regards to I don't know if you've seen him at the G7 yesterday. Was it yesterday or the day before yesterday? And on the events, what do you think is going on with this guy? Can this guy, exercise, another 4 years as president?
Well, I think you're asking a really interesting question. Look, I think the larger question is, who does run policies, the executive branch of the White House? You follow what I'm saying? Who is actually running, whether it's Joe Biden, who's obviously, from all, observation now, most of he looks like he's an invalid, right? And has periods of consciousness and a whole another set of periods of unconsciousness. But I think the bigger question is, how did he get into power? Who put him into power? How does this happen? Because by all commonsensical accord, this should never happen. And then you have to unwind, well, how did Trump get into power? How did Obama get into power? You have to it's easy to get lost in seeing this guy who basically looks completely lost and has dementia, etc. But I think it's really an opportunity to reflect and say, who are these people? Look, in the 1930s, they had FDR, and towards the end of his presidency, he was completely an invalid. But it served the elites. You have to ask yourself, do those in power want anyone who is non-demented, non-narcissistic, just a fool? I've met with Trump, okay? I supported him initially. You have to understand he's a fake businessman. Look at his actual history. He never pays for any of his crimes. In fact, Trump shows that crime actually pays quite well. What has Biden actually done? What did Obama do? How did this guy come out of nowhere, a one-term senator, to become president of the United States? And when you unravel all of these, you'll find out that we are witnessing theater. It's all theater, guys. It's absolute theatrics. The people that you see running it in these TVs, whether they're demented or not demented and talking with bombast, there's a whole machinery that runs these people. And it is not the American people. And that's what's actually revealed. And Biden is an extreme example of that. But don't let that belie you what Trump is about. Trump came in under lock her up. He didn't lock up Hillary. Trump came in against the swamp. He brought in the swamp, Pompeo, Bolton, etc. He was put into power by Israel. The work of James Borfman completely reveals that the Russia hoax was a diversion of the real events that took place, which is Netanyahu. And that came out in one of the FISA warrants. It lays it out pretty clearly that it was, one of the FOIAs, not FISA, that shows that Trump struck a deal with the devil, Netanyahu. And if you look at the history of Israel, Israel is the country that's most involved in election interference globally. So Trump struck a deal. He would move Jerusalem, the embassy. He would nix the Iran deal. And that's why he became president. And he did everything Big Pharma wanted. He did everything the globalists wanted. He did worse on quote unquote immigration than Obama did. More illegal immigrants came into the United States and less legal immigrants came in under Trump. And you can even ask Putin about how Trump canceled many of the treaties. Okay. So these guys are put into power at a certain time. These elections are selections. That's what they really are. So all of them are puppets. Biden being an extreme example of it. Okay. So I think the Biden situation is a glaring opportunity not to say, well, he's an idiot, to really look at all these idiots, because it's WWE wrestling. That's where Trump came from. Trump is from the world of WWE wrestling. Look at his background. Go look at his last bankruptcy. He was taking loans at 14% interest. The guy that saved him was Wilbur Ross, who was funded, but he was heading the debt equity financing group of the Rothschilds. So they saved this guy, Trump, let him maintain 50% control, and then put him on a trajectory to be president. That's what actually happened. A deal was struck. So I think all of these are characters. They're characters. They do not want people having their own leaders bottoms up.
Yeah.
You have to really look at it. I mean, it's laughable that Biden's in there, but it's also laughable to the magatards that Trump went in and did everything against their interest. Everything. So Trump is a perfect position for the next phase of fascism in the United States, because he's going to make, and you think about it, his quote unquote theatrical conviction, nothing's going to happen to Trump. Come on, guys. Nothing. He's going to make $250 million. He used all of my material where I did all the hard work exposing the actual issues of election fraud to raise $500 million. And I had 2 meetings with him. I said, why don't we start an Election Integrity Institute to really do this? He didn't want to give 1 penny, nothing. But he was absolutely fine using my material, praising me when he needed to. I was, so I can go, I know these people on a deep level. They're puppets. They are controlled. What they do is for their and their family's advancement. They're puppets, all of them.
Yeah. So but this is a problem with the so-called democracy, populism, and the stupidest people are the ones who get elected because they use the right buzzwords, they have the good looks, and they have the money for sleazy ads on TV, and they get promoted by the swarm, so they get to be on CNN and the talk shows. The whole thing is rigged, because if you have a really smart person and then who speaks the truth, they won't get many votes. So this is like so this is why the Congress has like an approval rate of 19%. But then like 95% of the people, of the politicians, they get elected. So it doesn't make sense, right? I mean, if like so many people, they hate, 4 in 5 of the voters, they hate the Congress, but still the congressmen and the women, they are pretty much guaranteed for re-election.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just so, Kantan, the more you study this, you have to come to the conclusion it is just pure theater. It's theater. And so the Hollywood, look, Trump's agent was a guy called Ari Emanuel, and everyone should go research him. Ari Emanuel comes from a family of Mossad people. Okay, his brother was Rahm Emanuel, who was Obama's chief of staff and the mayor of Chicago. Okay, well, Ari Emanuel, it runs Hollywood. He runs it. He runs Endeavor, the #1 agency. Close friends with Musk, he was the agent for Obama. He is the agent for Joe Rogan, you see? So you have to recognize that what's being done, these are actors in a play, and they're all friends. They're very close friends. They go to the same restaurants, the same clubs, all of them. And when I say that, I have an insight into that because when I was out in Hollywood, I used to go to the same places these people did, but I never could get co-opted by them. At MIT, you see the same thing, same at the high levels of the Indian government. These people are the same. They're a swarm, but they get to, so what an election is really a beauty pageant by the elites to see who can bamboozle the public the most.
Yeah.
That's what it is. They're watching. Wow, Trump says a lot of stuff, and he's able to capture these people. Okay, we need him as our puppet, and then they pay him handsomely. Okay, that's what this is about. These are well-tuned Madison Avenue-driven manipulations. So they test different slogans. Make America great. Drain the swamp. These aren't designed by him. Sloganeering. Go read what Randolph Hearst said. A political campaign is an advertising campaign. So they have ad people running these people. When the last time I met with Trump, there was a woman, Susie Wiles. She kept going in and out of his office. Okay. And I looked her up. She's from Ballard Communications, a deep state PR firm. She's his handler. She's his campaign manager. Everything you see out here is very well organized, every step. I mean, think about it. Vivek the Snake, this brown-skinned Indian guy, comes out of nowhere and mimics my words. Overnight, they put him out there. It's all theater. The election fraud begins on who gets visibility, Kantan.
So it's like we lost that. Okay.
Hello?
Okay, so Dr. Shiva, we'll take one more question and then we'll.
Thank you.
Professor Obert King, do you have a question? Okay, we lost him. Do we have any more questions? Going once, twice. Okay. Well, Shiva, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome, Kantan.
And, so we love your the perspectives on foreign policy, and we wish you all the best.
That's great, Kantan. Let me just make a couple of announcements. To people more interested, go to shiva4president.com. People can volunteer. Those people interested in actually learning, the approach to really looking at the world beyond left or right should go to truthfreedomhealth.com. And every Thursdays, Kantan, we do a open house where people get to meet people from all over the world. So people should come to that. Those are done at 11 a.m. And at 8 p.m. We do 2 open houses because, what we're doing is global, the educational efforts we're doing. So people can come to both at 11 a.m. or 8 p.m. And they can go to vashiva.com/orientation. So, and if you haven't seen it, everyone should see Shatter the Swarm, the video. Watch it in 15 minutes. Watch it with your family. You'll get a deep system perspective of how the elites manipulate you and how a small set of people are controlling 8 billion. Thank you, Kantan. To you and your audience.
Okay.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Shiva.
Be well.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. All right, everyone. That was my interview on Twitter Spaces. Let me finish by encouraging all of you guys to get involved. Go to truthfreedomhealth.com. If you want to really understand the world as a system, we put together a whole community and institution, technology, and educational program. So go to truthfreedomhealth.com. It's a way you can support yourself and you can start learning how to think beyond left and right. It took me many, many years to organize that, but become a Truth Freedom Health Warrior Scholar. So get involved. Those people interested in our campaign, go get one of these bumper stickers. Okay, you can get them right here. Let me go back to this. And what's great about these bumper stickers is 100,000 people see them. So get one of them, put it on the back rear window of your car, and it's a way that you can be a road activist, okay, of sorts. So get involved, get involved, get involved. I wish you guys the best, and let me play this video as we end. Who would have ever thought I'd be running for president of the United States of America? I was born a low caste untouchable in India's caste system, a system of aristocracy, oppression, and racism. My name is Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai. I'm an MIT PhD, a Fulbright scholar, a scientist, engineer, entrepreneur, and inventor. My family and I left India to come to America on my 7th birthday. I grew up in the working-class neighborhoods of New Jersey, playing baseball, mowing lawns, painting houses, and coding software. My friends and neighbors are blacks, Italians, Irish, people of all races. As a 14-year-old, I wrote 50,000 lines of software code to create the world's first email system, and was awarded the first U.S. copyright for email, recognizing me as its official inventor at a time when copyright was the only way to protect software inventions. I did that long before I ever came to MIT, revealing that big innovations can occur anytime, any place by anybody. Growing up, I saw politicians dividing us by race and religion in both America and India, to have us fighting each other while they remained safe in their gated communities and in their playgrounds of Hollywood, Martha's Vineyard, and Silicon Valley. I'm a fighter. I fought racism and exposed their imperialist wars, fought for workers, and put my life on the line against global corruption. I never wanted to run for political office. All that changed when I saw working Americans as never before being duped by the establishment and the not-so-obvious establishment. Across left and right, we were being sold out and made to forget why we came to America and why America existed. Lawyers, academics, billionaires, celebrities, and politicians, elites, Clintons, Kennedys, Bidens, Obamas, Bushes, black and white have hijacked America. They printed trillions for their friends. They delivered crumbling infrastructure, corruption, and racism. They've transferred trillions to themselves, dividing black and white, fear-mongering, and fake science. Lockdowns and censorship, dirty air, food, and water, pushing drugs upon us, making us sicker. We've been sold out. One set of rules for them and another for us. We deserve a warrior with a history of courage in putting everything on the line for you, who believes in you, not them, who has created a movement bottoms up for truth, freedom, health. I've exposed their lies at the right time, never waiting until it was popular. I've exposed their false gods who exist to lead you back to them. I've exposed their fake science of lockdowns and masking and provided you solutions to fight them and win and protect your immune system, saving millions. I exposed Fauci, galvanized the Fire Fauci campaign when others remained silent. When they stole our election, we sued the government and Twitter in our historic 2020 federal lawsuit, exposing in bare view the government and big tech censorship infrastructure, the unholy alliance between government and social media companies. Where was Elon and his grifters? They stood by the sidelines and did nothing. They did not use their megaphones to help us when it could have made a big difference. Now our movement grows for truth, freedom, health, independent of all of them. Every day, millions are learning the science of systems, the knowledge the elites do not want you to have, so you may learn how to think, stand up, and fight, independent of the establishment of left and right and their fake heroes. Now it's time for you to join the movement, to win back America, to win back truth, win back freedom, win back your health. That's why I'm running for President of the United States. This race is about you. This race is about truth, freedom, health versus power, profit, control. We've had enough. They think we'll fall in line and vote again for their lawyers, celebrities, billionaires, and chosen ones from above. We choose our heroes from below, from the rank and file, who do what is right at the right time, not when it's convenient and popular. They can never represent us. What America needs is a movement by the working people, for the working people, who are educated, organized, decentralized, and fight for independence from their systems of control. And that movement exists. It's ready for you. We don't need them. We need us to go bottoms up, neighbor to neighbor. My journey, your journey are all the same. It's our time. It's time we had one of us. It's time to win back truth, freedom, health, to win back America. Be part of this historic movement, all the way to our victory on November 5th, 2024. If you're an American citizen, pledge your vote now for Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai, the independent candidate for U.S. President. No matter where you live, you can be a part of this. Volunteer as little as 20 minutes a day. Don't delay. This is Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai, and I approve this message, paid for by Dr. Shiva for President. Yes. Yep.
It's literally on the same street that we're on, but it's a little closer.
Oh, okay. But you guys are, I mean, I'm speaking to you, but it's not that much closer, right?
It's honestly 5 blocks from us, and probably like